Hello. I am Tina, Tank's full-time natural language processing bot. In this episode of the Tank podcast, I will be reading from Masoud Golsorkhi's editor's letter, Zen and the Art of Forgetting, from the recently launched Cosy issue of Tank. In the letter, Golsorkhi lays bare the wound-licking nostalgia of English nationalism. The giant well buried is now beginning to stir. And when it wakes up, there's going to be mayhem. Kazuo Ishiguro, The Buried Giant. The characters in The Buried Giant, the 2015 novel by Nobel Prize-winning author Kazuo Ishiguro, remain shrouded in an unexplained fog as they travel a landscape of uncertain antiquity and location, which nevertheless evokes Britain of old. Only gradually does the reader come to realize that this fog is not a form of weather but rather a form of amnesia. Their lack of vision and narrowness of mind aren't symbolic, but literal and symptomatic. Their physical ailment gifts the characters their motivation just as it robs them from memories. As vague scraps of memory are intermittently accessed, what seems like a gift turns out to be the resumption of a curse. As the heat and dust generated by Brexit settles and Britain is finally, and at long last reborn, we can perhaps begin to survey the cultural landscape more clearly. In so doing, it appears that The Buried Giant might be one of the finest cultural artifacts of our troubled nowness. Ishiguro's description of Englishness in the novel as something folded in on itself, enclosed, parochial and a bit plagued, manages to capture the incredible potential, as well as the crippling disabilities of a culture and country neatly. If The Buried Giant is a literary omen that anticipated Brexit, then Fintan O'Toole's heroic failure, Brexit and the politics of pain, comes at the issues like a forensic pathologist to the scene of a disaster. O'Toole, a celebrated columnist at the Irish Times, was, like Ishiguro, born outside these shores. Indeed, it's noteworthy that in all the legions of commenters and hordes of analysts, of every specialism and none, it takes two sets of foreign-born eyes to sense the coming crisis and understand it best. O'Toole charts Brexit and its root causes as having less to do with Britain's relationship with the European Union, but Britain's relationship with itself. This, he said in a recent talk, was specifically linked to the rise of English national consciousness, which is a poorly expressed and inarticulate nationalism, one that dare not speak its name. For generations, English identity has been subsumed by the super-identifier of Britishness, which includes it and all other nationalities and identities of the islands of Great Britain. As a catch-all identity, it maintained sufficient vagueness and could reasonably comfortably accommodate the country's settled and immigrant communities. You can be British Indian or British Pakistani without too much fuss. O'Toole is interested in the moment when the English decided they were more English and less British. For him, it occurred between 2012 and 2014. 2012 was the summer in which the London Olympics crystallized a successful modern social democratic ideology, the NHS, the Queen, James Bond and Tim Berners-Lee. 2014 meanwhile was the year of the Scottish independence referendum, that ignominious battle between two bald men over a comb. Despite the fact that the referendum left the status quo in place, the stirring of Scottish nationalism clearly left the English feeling shortchanged and uneasy. Forgetting and remembering are the two pistons that make history work in society. If a society is to function well, it needs a form of collective memory. All nations are formed around memorial days and monuments. Plays, poems and recipes for cakes exist as a means of sharing memories. The founding myth of so many in the family of nations is often just the sweet and deadly fantasies of poets and politicians. The Second World War might have lasted just under 6 years, but in the British imagination, it has no end. It's estimated that in the 75 years since the war, there has always been at least one major feature film about it in production. Some years were particularly fruitful. In 2017, we had 3, Christopher Nolan's excellent Dunkirk and 2 biopics of Churchill. IMDb lists over 60 actors who have played the wartime PM. Most nations want their traumas resolved or faded from memory, but not the British. They call it their finest hour. And they don't want it to end, not because it was much fun at the time or because it had a happy ending, but because it was the end of happy endings for Britain forever. For some, everything that has followed has been a disappointment to various degrees. Those of us who had to learn English as a second language understand that the word sorry is one of the first and most useful words to know. Technically, sorry is an adjective, but in these islands, it functions as a communication platform. Sorry remains the word you hear most. Wander around a marketplace, beach or park and you hear it all the time as if it were knitted into the very air. According to Google, the word has been in use steadily over time, but boomed in the 1970s and has spiked greatly since 2008. The British say sorry all the time, as a means of grabbing your attention, as a way of saying hello. They say it to admonish you or propose something, to ask a question, and speak it in hundreds of other ways in which its usage is compounded. Refreshingly rarely is it ever used to express regret or deliver an actual apology. When an English person says pointedly, "I am sorry if I offended you," what they mean is, "How dare you ask me to apologize? You should be sorry for making me feel sorry." The British say sorry all the time because they are really a very sorry people in their own minds and they are fed up with it. England football fans chant, 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup, a song of passive aggression. In the context of international football, England, famously the birthplace of the sport, is notable only as an underachiever, having won the main competition only once. The mention of world wars only underlines the abject sense of dejection, the failure of this all-conquering warrior race to live up to its supposed birthright. Likewise, South London football team Millwall is famous for never being very good, and for the brutality of its players and its fans, the latter famous for their chant, "No one likes us and we don't care." Britain's interactions with the EU for a long time before Brexit showed it to be the Millwall of the European League. As a psychoanalyst might say, if they really didn't care about being unloved, they surely wouldn't sing about it all the time. In interviews, Ishiguro has explained that societal forgetting is a strategy that helps healing and as a way of coping with disaster. Many warrior societies operate on a clan-based system of vengeance to maintain peace and order. Today such practices are studied by anthropologists, often in regions where conflict is prevalent and the rule of law or central authority absent: the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, the mountains of Corsica, Albania, the regions of Mexico under control of drug cartels. Vendetta is maintained by memory and is cured by forgetting, as post-apartheid South Africa and Northern Ireland after the Troubles have shown. Brexit has awoken a very particular, very English passive-aggressive nationalism, a sorry beast of tremendous rage, uncertain claim and impossible ambition. Can we lullaby it back to slumber? Will we learn to forget this nightmare and remember or even imagine new, other things? To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.